the RMB situation, you mentioned a so-called currency problem. I mean, do you see the day in the next 5 years where it's fully convertible and flexible?
Well, you're talking to a person who's quite old. If I'm around in 5 years, I'd like to think that that is the case. I think we've all got to move towards that opportunity, and I think the challenge also is whether we should move towards an international currency, because the speculation and the complexity of currency has caused some of the irritation, not only among the trading nations, but among individuals. But it's not for me to say how it will happen, but I think everyone who knows how to deal with these situations is very cognizant of the problem it takes to get over it, and I think the RMB will become more convertible. But when it'll come, that is a matter for, obviously, the powers that be.
Good evening, Rowan. It's the 4th of July 2016 and it's about 1:30. And I'm making you this video quite late because I was compiling the little collection of clips that you've just seen of your parties celebrating the Brexit vote. So I thought it would cheer you up to see those again. Because I know how much you're into nationalistic celebrations, so you really love that, won't you? So I put that on there to cheer you up. You see how thoughtful I am, you just don't appreciate me. Anyway, of course, I'm making you this video to reassure you I haven't been seducing any priests over the weekend. Although, of course, I've seen my beloved and I'm just thinking about him all the time. I could hardly be bothered to make this video because I just want to spend all my time thinking about my soon-to-be lover because he's just so wonderful. I'm just thinking about him all the time and I dream about him every night. But I won't tell you about that because it's a bit personal. Anyway, I thought we could carry on with our talk about your bizarre lectures about the Desert Fathers. So I've got one of my postcards out from Morocco to act as a visual aid there. I actually have stayed in the desert myself in Morocco because I'm so xenophobic. You see, I just went and stayed with a Berber tribe in the Sahara Desert on my own. And I seem to have survived, and Al-Qaeda didn't turn up either, so I suppose I should think myself lucky that you didn't decide to take a trip to Morocco that day. Otherwise I might well not be here. But you'd probably like that, wouldn't you? Anyway, I don't want to go on too long. So I'm talking about this video this evening, which is entitled Silence and Honey Cakes. Now, I've spoken before about your bombastic self-justification and also the fact that you're a psychopath, so you change your presentation depending on what you're trying to manipulate out of your audience or target people who you think may be in your audience, like me. So you've previously collectivised everybody. For example, all the Jews have been victims since the 4th century, and all the Christians have been powerful, rich, and in control of everything, which I mentioned in that video where I was talking about you fawning all over that Muslim man and pretending to be his friend when you were actually causing all his problems. And also, you think that poor people have no choice but to become prostitutes. And this is because the only poor people you've had any real involvement with were, in fact, prostitutes. So you've got your whole definition of what it's like to be poor or working class from drug addicts you were paying for sex in the 1970s in Leeds. And probably in other places as well, but I'm particularly concerned with Leeds because that's where you would have been hearing the people with the same accent as me, and that's why you tarred me with that brush. And also I was a threat to you because I'm competent and you're not. And I can see through all your bullshit as well. So you wouldn't have liked that, would you? Anyway, so you're actually talking about individual gifts in this video, which people don't usually have because they're entirely determined by the circumstances of their life when that suits you. But you're trying to manipulate something different today, so they have different gifts. So this is what you say. Now the brother who had brought the brother said to his companion, I have taken you to the foreigner, that is Arsenius, and to the Egyptian Moses. Which of the two do you prefer? As for me, he replied, I prefer Moses. One of the fathers heard this, and he prayed to God, saying, Lord, explain this matter to me. For your sake one flees from human beings, and the other, for your sake, receives human beings with open arms. Then 2 large boats were shown to him floating on the river, and in one of them he saw Abba Arsenius and the Holy Spirit of God in perfect quiet, and in the other boat was Abba Moses with the angels of God, and they were all eating honey cakes. So you're talking here about one of these brothers, Moses, is very sociable, and the other, Arsenius, is more solitary. And you go on to say in a minute that they've got different vocations. I haven't actually shown the part of the clip where you're talking about Arsenius, who you're describing as very cultured and sophisticated and very humble. And Arsenius is someone you clearly identify with. This is actually the way that you were always presented in the church and the media, that you were very cultured, very sophisticated, an absolute genius, and also a very, very humble man. Whereas anyone who's had any real involvement with you knows actually how arrogant you are. Anyway, so you go on to say about this story. That wonderful little story is perhaps one of the most vivid expressions of that theme in the Desert Fathers about the distinctiveness of people's calling. So you talk about calling a lot, calling from God, because they do talk about this a lot in the Church of England, but in my experience it's just a pretentious way of people saying, oh, I'm so special, I've got to be able to do whatever I want. The clergy, I mean, that's what they say. Because if you criticise them about anything, I'm not talking about me necessarily criticising them, but if anybody criticised them about anything, they'd often come up with the answer, that's not my calling, or well, that's not my gift. And I quite regret not asking a couple of them, what actually is your gift? Because it wasn't very easy to discern. But this is the way that some of them, at least, diverted criticism. They would say, that's not my gift, that's not my calling. When people were asking them really reasonable things. And another thing I should have said was, well, you're in the wrong job then, aren't you, if that's not your gift? That's my experience of this talk about calling and gifts in the Church of England. That oh yes, and also when some crazy Anglican clergy in North Yorkshire were trying to force me to do a lot of menial work for them, which they didn't want to do for themselves. One of them actually told me, God's given you a great gift for this kind of work. And it was just to try and get me to work as a slave. And I really do literally mean work as a slave there. I was working in a retreat house, and I was doing all the work. I didn't really see any other of the residential community members. They called it a community. It wasn't a community at all. It was some elite Anglican clergy, empire building, and working everyone else there as slaves and treating them in a very arrogant manner. So that's what they told me. God's given you a real gift for this kind of work. And that was because they wanted me to do it and they didn't want to do it themselves. Because God's given me gifts for all kinds of work, but they didn't want me to be doing any of that. They wanted to manipulate me into doing what they wanted. So this is my experience of Anglican clergy, and they're friends of yours as well. So you were probably working them from behind as well. In fact, I've got no doubt that you were. So then you say, and the sin which I mentioned last night of inattention, of not being sensitive to the difference in people's callings, remains one of the great worries, one of the great corrupting and frustrating factors in spiritual life. Well, I don't think inattention is a sin, to be honest. I think you've made that up. I've never ever heard anyone ever describe inattention as a sin. I've never heard of it. You've just made it up. So I think you wanted to be telling me I'm committing a sin because I'm not recognising what a special snowflake you are and what entitlements you have to special treatment to be able to hound me round from town to town and totally destroy my life and make up a pack of lies about me. And of course at this time you didn't know I knew all about your 9/11 lies, did you, and all of that stuff when you were making this crap up. So you were trying to convince me that you're a special snowflake and you've got a special calling from God, and I'm very sinful because I just don't recognise how special and precious you are and what a special vocation you've got. So you go on to say, here we have two people reacting totally differently to human contact and human interest. One withdraws into silence, one embraces, and you say that in quite a funny voice. And they're both all right. Well, I think you're talking about sex here. I think you're talking about David Pete sexually harassing me because you were talking about the music of the spheres in another one of these videos, and you keep talking about space, although you don't mention it in this one. So I'm the one who withdraws into silence, although I'm normally a very sociable person. But when people are bullying me and treating me like shit, which everybody is doing at the moment, then I don't really want anything to do with them because I don't like being treated like that. Nobody's got any right to treat me like that, and nobody had the right to take over my life, completely destroy it, and try and torture me to death. And then try and murder me with haloperidol because I didn't like all of that happening. So that's why I've withdrawn into silence so much, whereas normally I would be more sociable. And one embracing, you're talking about sex here. It's a funny expression to use. One withdraws into silence and one becomes very sociable. One's very sociable, you could have said. One embraces and they're both all right. Well, no, they're not all right, really, because it's certainly not all right. The bishop trying to screw people and expect sexual favours in return for ordination. And it's not all right for the clergy to be forcing parishioners to have sex with them and sexually harassing them and having smear campaigns spread behind their back and all that kind of thing. So that's not all right. So don't give me this shit that it's all right for me to withdraw into silence, which contradicts something you said in another video where you were giving a lecture about Teresa of Avila to some Carmelite nuns in the United States. I think it was in Boston. About 2014 you did that, where you were saying that if a person becomes close to God, if they're holy and they're contemplative and they're very close to God, you said that would be a person who was very sociable and was quite involved with the other nuns in the convent and that kind of thing. So I'd already withdrawn by then, and you were criticising me for that because you wanted me to be going out and seducing priests, which obviously I'm going to be doing, but not until you're in prison, and only my beloved anyway. I'm quite discriminate, you know. I don't seduce psychopathic perverts and hideous old men. Or hideous young men for that matter, but you're an old man and you are hideous, so I'm quite discriminating in the priests I seduce. In fact, I never thought of it before you suggested it, but I'm so glad you suggested it. I can't think why I didn't think of it before, because it's such a fantastic idea. I suppose it's because you're more intelligent than me that you thought of that and I didn't. Don't tell me they're both all right. And in any case, it's quite a strange thing as well. I wanted to mention about what you said to these Carmelite nuns, to be telling a bunch of contemplative nuns living in a convent who've chosen, I mean, they're an enclosed order that you were speaking to. And to tell them that people who are close to God are the most sociable people. I'm not saying that they're not sociable in the convent, but it's quite a strange thing to say to a group of contemplative nuns. And I don't even know why you would be talking to them about Teresa of Avila, because I'm quite sure that they certainly know more about her than you do, particularly since you talk nothing but shit and you make it all up. Oh yes, that was the lecture that you said she was Jewish as well. Yes. What a strange man you are. As if they wouldn't know that that wasn't right. You're just completely mad. You go and say these things to people who know that what you're saying isn't true. So anyway, you say silence and honey cakes are equally acceptable. So yes, well, it is equally acceptable depending on your personality and your preferences to be sociable or to be more reclusive and interior. But that doesn't really include trying to force people to have sex with you. And then you go on to say, I'm not going to go on and elaborate on all of this, but that vision is expressed even more economically in a very brief anecdote. So you're going to help me economically if I say it's all right for a creepy old pervert to try and force sex on me, and just to pretend, oh, well, it's all right that he did that. Or to say that he didn't do it. That's probably what you really wanted. Anyway, that's the end of my comments on this part, but I've got some more comments to make in a minute.
Now, the brother who had brought the visitor said to his companion, I have taken you to the foreigner, that is Arsenius, and to the Egyptian, Moses. Which of the two do you prefer? "Oh, as for me," he replied, "I prefer Moses." One of the fathers heard this, and he prayed to God, saying, "Lord, explain this matter to me. For your sake, one flees from human beings, and the other, for your sake, receives human beings with open arms." Then 2 large boats were shown to him, floating on the river, and in one of them he saw Abba Arsenius and the Holy Spirit of God in perfect quiet. And in the other boat was Abba Moses with the angels of God, and they were all eating honey cakes. That wonderful little story is perhaps one of the most vivid expressions of that theme in the Desert Fathers, the distinctiveness of people's calling. And the sin, which I mentioned last night, of inattention, not being sensitive to the difference in people's callings, remains one of the great worries, one of the great corrupting and frustrating factors in spiritual life. Here we have 2 people reacting totally differently to human contact and human interest. One withdraws into silence, one embraces, and they're both all right. Silence and honey cakes are equally acceptable. But that particular vision is expressed perhaps even more economically in a very brief anecdote.
So you go on to say, there is a standing back before the other. There are no standardized, generalized forms of holiness. Each one needs to discover what their path is. A brother asked one of the fathers, "Are you defiled by having evil thoughts?" There was a discussion on this. Some said yes, others said no. The brother went to a very experienced old man to question him about the discussion. The old man said to him, "What is required of each one is regulated according to their capacity. What is required of each one is regulated according to their capacity." That's you that reiterates that. And you say, and you can see why, in the light of that, the whole business of passing judgment is so impossible. Passing judgment in the sense that the Desert Fathers so deplore. Well, you're always on this theme, aren't you? That I'm not allowed to pass any judgment on you, and I can't quote judgmental statements that Jesus made about hypocritical religious leaders because that's anti-Semitic. So I think I've mentioned this before, actually. I don't really care what the Desert Fathers deplore. Anyway, and they're a group of monks, and there's also nuns living in the desert as well. So they're living in a community life, a bunch of ordinary people who've decided to become monks and nuns in the desert. And I'm guessing that if there were any psychopathic perverts there, they'd have thrown them out by now. So you're not the kind of person they're talking about. They're talking about normal people, shall we say, who are not predatory psychopaths. You're a sexual predator, you're a sadist, you're a psychopath, you're a Luciferian. These people were all Christians who'd left everything to go and live in the desert to try and live a more contemplative life and to overcome themselves and to draw closer to God. And you do not fit into this category at all. I talked about this actually when I was talking about Teresa of Avila as well, because you leave out sayings, things that she said about not having dysfunctional people in the convent. I can't give you a reference because I haven't looked it up. But I mean, in the society at the time, if there were women who weren't able to marry for various reasons, mainly because no one wanted to marry them because maybe they were a bit crazy. So their father would put them in a convent, and that could make life quite difficult there. And Teresa didn't want her reformed order to be serving this kind of function in society, which monastic orders traditionally have in a lot of cases up until then. So she was saying not to accept women like that who weren't going to fit into the community life. But if you really must accept one, she said, kind of lock her in a room and don't let her out. don't let her come and cause all these problems. She does elaborate on it a lot more. But if you've got this woman in the convent and you can't send her back to her family, then kind of exclude her, really. Don't let her be causing all these problems. Well, you're the kind of person she would have been talking about, because you would be causing conflict and playing people off against each other. You'd be trying to screw the people there because you're absolutely obsessed with sex. You'd be launching smear campaigns behind the back and all this kind of thing. So Teresa didn't want that going on in her convent, so she said, don't accept anyone like that, and if you have to accept them, you can't send them back to your family, then lock them in the room and don't let them cause any trouble. So these are the kind of things you always miss out, because you want people to indulge you, really. You don't even want to be forgiven, because that would mean acknowledging that you did something wrong. You want to be indulged. You don't even want to be forgiven. So, how do you know how hard temptation bore on somebody? So this is the Desert Fathers talking about... You're talking about them deploring passing judgments on people, and I've just said they're not talking about people like you. So how do you know how hard temptation bore on somebody? Well, I don't really care, Rowan. You didn't just accidentally do some bad things to me. You were following me around the country, and even in foreign countries, and even to my secular employment, trying to ruin me and trying to ruin my life. So don't tell me you were tortured by temptation every minute of the day to do that. It was a very cynical campaign that you orchestrated, that you engineered, and it went on for years and years and years. So it wasn't something like you just snapped and did something bad, or you did it a few times and then you forgot about it. It went on for years, 15 years, before anyone realised what you were up to. So don't give me this bullshit, and especially after what you've put me through as well, sleeping on a fucking park bench. You're just completely mad. You're a self-obsessed, narcissistic little prick. Don't give me this shit about how hard temptation bore on you. I don't give a shit after what you've put me through. I don't give a shit. You've got no moral authority whatsoever. You've got no moral and spiritual authority. You never tell the truth about anything, and there's a million people dead because of you. A temptation which might seem to you trivial might be, to another, crushing. Well, I've been tempted to kill myself to get away from all this sadistic abuse I've been subjected to for the last 7.5 years. And you don't know how hard that temptation's borne down on me, and you're telling me to shoot myself as well. Because I've got no escape from this. They're firing weapons at me all the time. There's no way of getting away from this constant harassment. The only thing I can do is kill myself. I've had weapons fired at my head that caused me so much distress, because it went on for hour after hour after hour, not letting me go to sleep. That happened numerous times when I was in my house, and it caused me so much distress I wet myself. So don't give me this fucking shit about how much temptation's borne down on you, because you don't give a shit about it. You've got no morals. You're a psychopath. I don't give a shit. Stop making excuses. You've got no excuse. You're an abusive, spiteful, sadistic bastard. You're a bastard. I don't give a fucking shit. A temptation which might seem to you trivial might be to another crushing. How are you able to say everybody ought to be the same kind of ascetic. What is hard for you might be easy for someone else. What is easy for you might be hard for someone else. So this is talking about the monks in the desert. It's not talking about psychopaths trying to ruin and destroy other people in an orchestrated campaign, lying about everything, working as a globalist puppet to destroy every civilization and to depopulate the earth. So don't give me this shit about how hard temptation bore down on you, because it didn't. You've got no morals and you sold your soul straight away just to get what you want. There is an anecdote again about Abbot Arsenius, someone complaining about the fact that Arsenius doesn't seem to exhibit quite the same degree of physical asceticism as everybody else. Arsenius is the person you're identifying with, who you describe as very humble and cultured, and you definitely are identifying with him. The old man who is dealing with the claimant says, "When you were in the world, what were you?" "I was a farmer," says the monk. "And when you retired at night, where did you go to bed?" "Oh, I just rolled up in the corner of the hut," said the ex-farmer. "And what did you have to eat in the morning?" "Just a little bit of maize porridge." And the old man said, when Abbot Arsenius was in the world, he slept between sheets of silk every night and breakfasted off gold plates. You have experienced very little change in becoming a monk. Well, you haven't become a monk, have you, Rowan? You haven't given up anything. You're extremely wealthy. You got £750,000 off the Church of England for basically just to take the piss out of people and subvert the whole of the Church of England and any other denomination and Anglican province you could get your hands on as well. And then you were dabbling in world affairs as well. So you haven't become a monk. So I can't even imagine what you think you've got to be so sanctimonious about. You're an evil, abusive bastard. You're very wealthy. You own a lot of property. You've never given up anything. The only thing you've ever done is sold your soul to get up the greasy pole because of your ambition and you think that you're entitled to more than other people and that other people aren't worth anything at all. They're just ciphers, pawns in your game who you cynically manipulate. And then when someone won't cave in for you, you're completely bewildered by that. This is because you're insane. Your worldview is completely delusional. So, individual vocation. Well, I had an individual vocation about 20 years ago to be a priest in the Anglican Church, and you destroyed that. So don't talk to me about fucking vocation either. You haven't got a leg to stand on. How dare you, after what I'd just been put through when you were talking about these lectures, how dare you stand there moralising at me, you arrogant little prick. How dare you say so individual vocation when you went everywhere to destroy my vocation? I had a vocation, you haven't got a vocation. Standing back before the mystery of the other. And that standing back before the mystery of the other means that each person is given room in this spiritual world. Room to grow as God wills. Well, you're using God as a punctuation mark again, aren't you? And there is no mystery about you. You're a psychopath. You're a sexual predator. You're an Illuminati shill. I've been researching you since 2009, and I knew you for over 15 years before that. I already thought you were a cult leader, even before I started researching you. That was what I first started researching, your cultic practices. So there isn't any mystery about you, Rowan. You're a psychopath. You're an open book. I can see straight through you. And you think you've got the right to stand there moralising at me that I've got no right to judge you. I've got every right to judge you. You've got no right to judge me. What were you doing to me anyway when you were having me thrown out of churches and going all around the world telling people I was a sex-crazed lunatic and a repressed lesbian and a danger to the public, and you tried to ruin my secular employment and my studies in universities as well, and caused me problems in the places I was living. So you tell me I'm judgmental and you were doing all of that. Oh, you arrogant little shit. Do you know, it really is the biggest regret of my life that I didn't kick you in the balls when I had the chance. I can't tell you how furious I am about that. But I will be coming to arrest you anyway, so don't forget to be alert. And I'm just going to make a brief comment about my beloved in a minute. Because I don't want you to forget about it. You need to be thinking about that all the time, you see, about me being with my beloved as soon as you're in prison.
There is a kind of standing back before the mystery of the other. There are no standardized, generalized forms of holiness. Each one needs to discover what their path is. A brother asked one of the fathers, "Are you defiled by having evil thoughts?" There was a discussion on the subject. Some said yes, and others said no. The brother went to a very experienced old man to question him about the discussion. The old man said to him, "What is required of each one is regulated according to their capacity." What is required of each one is regulated according to their capacity. And you can see why, in the light of that, the whole business of passing judgment is so impossible. Passing judgment in the sense that the Desert Fathers so deplore. How do you know how hard pressure or temptation bore on somebody? A temptation which might seem to you trivial might be to another crushing. How are you able to say everybody ought to be the same kind of ascetic? What is hard for you might be easy for someone else. What is easy for you might be hard for someone else. There's an anecdote again of Abba Arsenius, someone complaining about the fact that Arsenius doesn't seem to exhibit quite the same degree of physical asceticism as everybody else. The old man who's dealing with the complainant says, "When you were in the world, what were you?" "I was a farmer," says the monk. "And when you retired at night, where did you go to bed?" "I just rolled up in a corner of the hut," said the ex-farmer. "And what did you have to eat in the morning?" "Oh, just a little bit of maize porridge." And the old man says, "When Abba Arsenius was in the world, he slept between sheets of silk every night and breakfasted off gold plate. You have experienced very little change in becoming a monk." So, individual vocation, standing back before the mystery of the other. And that standing back before the mystery of the other means that each person is given room in this spiritual world, room to grow as God wills.
Right, so I haven't actually got that much to say about my beloved, although I just want to reiterate how absolutely wonderful he is. I'm just so thrilled that I've met him, and I can't stop thinking about him. He's just so gorgeous and handsome and sexy. And he's just got such a nice personality as well. He's absolutely nothing like you. So have a nice week, won't you? And don't forget, be alert. Hasta la próxima.